Welcome to the Alaska Realtor live stream. My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm an associate real estate broker in the state of Alaska, and my mission, as always, is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today, I'm very lucky to be joined by a couple colleagues of mine, Mark Masley and Nani Palmer. They both come to us with a ton of experience with the real estate industry. And Mark is actually with the legislative committee with the Anchorage Board of Realtors, and he's going to be talking about a lot of initiatives,
stuff.
a lot of stuff. Yeah, a lot of stuff that's occurred lately, and it's all very important. If you're a homeowner in Alaska or you're considering doing so, then yeah, this is definitely going to be a very important conversation for you to hear. And Nani is going to be my co-host. So, guys, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, let's go ahead and get started just with a couple of nice, easy icebreaker questions as people are getting set up here. So, what initially brought you to Alaska?
That's a good question. I'm born and raised in California, and so I was living in San Diego back in 1998, and I met my wife in San Diego. And we ended up getting married in 1999. She's from Alaska. She was a service high school girl up here in Anchorage, and her parents and her siblings are still up here as well. And so we got married up here. We came up in 1999 to get married, and then went back down to San Diego, and we started talking about where we wanted to raise kids. And I thought Alaska would be a great place. And so I actually had to convince her to come back to Alaska, but she did. And so I've been living in Alaska, in Anchorage, since 2001.
Oh, man, that's awesome. And I mean, that makes you pretty salty for this area too.
Yeah. I'm not quite a legit Alaskan yet. I hear the benchmark there is 30 years, but I'm working on it. So.
Well on your way. So Nani, what kind of brought you up to the state? Well, yeah.
Oh, I am your quintessential military brat that came up with their dad and drove the Alaskan highway to get up here. We actually started down in Florida and drove all the way to Alaska, taking our time doing that. But we came up here in 1988. And went to my high school years up here in Alaska and made it as far from Eagle River to Anchorage, and then decided to move back to Eagle River. And so I've been in Eagle River, since about 2000, I think. So for a little while. Does that make me saltier?
A little bit. It does actually. Outstanding. Well, Mark, you're pretty involved with the Anchorage Board of Realtors and Realtors in general. So what made you decide to jump into real estate and become a realtor to begin with?
So I've been licensed since 1984. I got licensed in California back then. I've also been licensed in a couple of other states, including North Carolina. And when I came up here in 2001, we just moved up here. So I didn't really know what was going to happen, what I was going to do. My wife is a event planner by training and by profession. And so we just figured we'd come up to Alaska and just see what opportunities were up here. And then I met a fellow by the name of Skip Pennybaker, who kind of dove into my history and decided that I needed to do real estate up here as well. And so that was, I got licensed here in Alaska in, I think it was August 2001, which was just a couple of months after we had moved up here. And the rest is history. I started with RE/MAX in 2003, and that was largely due to the influence of my broker at the time, who was Mark Courting. And he kind of has been my mentor, not only in Alaska real estate, but also in terms of participation in the Realtor organization. since I've known him. So I would credit Mark with getting me involved with the Realtors and actually supporting me in those events until he passed in 2016. So.
Oh, outstanding. Now, most people just in the public, writ large, they're not really aware of what NARB, the National Association of Realtors, is, what realtors do. For a lot of people, they just kind of see the stereotypical, super obnoxious, like, post on social media with somebody talking about, oh, I just sold this house, bless, I'm going to go buy some really obnoxious car on the road that's going to be terrible later, just horrendous. Yeah, it's terrible. There's a whole stereotype. We all know it, but most people aren't aware of what NAR is and how it actually helps a lot of homeowners. So can you kind of walk people through, educate us real quick on what it is and how it helps homeowners?
Sure. So NAR is the National Association of Realtors. They're the top parent branch of our trade organization, the Realtor Organization. And there's several other layers below them. There's the State Association of Realtors. There's the local associations of Realtors, of which we have 6 in Alaska. And then it goes down to the broker, and then it goes down to the individual licensees within that brokerage. So the National Association is primarily involved in a 30,000-foot view of the industry. And their primary objective is to, well, it's threefold. It's to educate their members and increase the professionalism of the profession. And it's to establish the code of ethics to ensure that realtors are operating in an ethical manner that we all agree on is the best way for our profession to move forward. And then the third thing is the advocacy efforts that NAR does on all of our behalfs. So they are one of the largest lobbying groups in the country, and they focus almost exclusively, well, they do focus exclusively on what's right, not only for our profession, but also for the clients that we serve, which are the individual property owners throughout the country. And they do that by following legislation. They do that by helping to elect legislators that are in alignment with the way that we would like to see real estate property rights enforced on behalf of our clients. And they're also instrumental in helping us with things that have to do with our profession. For instance, during COVID, on a national level, they were making several efforts to have us declared a essential industry so that we could continue to operate during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely huge. Because without having that designation at the time, just someone trying to buy a house would have been straight out of luck, because can't really do much. The agent can't even open the door for you to begin the process.
Right.
So no, that was huge.
It's everything too. It's the, they estimate in the state of Alaska, for every home that's sold, there's, tens of thousands of dollars that go out into the real estate related services, including title, appraisal, home inspections, contractors, property taxes, just everything else that is part of the home industry is really, 15 to 16% of the gross economy nationwide. So,
absolutely. So, what have been some of those issues that NAR has kind of been focused on, at least in Alaska, recently?
Well, nationwide, they focus on several issues that affect us here in Alaska. For instance, the national flood insurance and the availability of that is something that, obviously with the amount of water that we have in Alaska, it's always an issue, especially since what we've seen lately with the Mendenhall in Juneau. The ability to get flood insurance is largely dependent on that national fund or the national requirement for insurance companies to provide that. So the preservation of that has been fantastic. The the preservation of the 1031 exchange has always been a benefit to us on the commercial side of things. The preservation of the capital gains exclusion that we experience when we sell a house that we've lived in for 2 of the last 5 years has been huge. The continuing efforts to keep mortgage interest tax deductible and property taxes tax deductible has also been a huge effort. And here in Alaska, primarily what we see, the way we see NAR acting within the individual states is when we have a state issue come up. And our state issues here in Alaska are grassroots, which means they start at the local level in the local associations. And then once the local level has everything kind of sorted out, they kick it up to the state. And then our state government affairs director, Errol Champion, kind of takes the reins on it and puts everything together. And the most recent example of that we saw was the efforts that were made in Juneau to reverse or to repeal the ordinance that they put in place for real estate property price disclosures.
Absolutely. And so I think Nani probably has some questions about that whole issue, because she's a little bit more educated on it than me. So I will let you go and take it away, Nani.
Yeah. So as we were discussing ahead of time, like, Mark, can you explain to us exactly what it means that we are a state that is a non-disclosure state of sales prices, and why it's even important that we advocated and continued to try and remain a state that does not disclose that?
So it's a little bit of a complicated question. There are 12 states in the United States that are considered non-disclosure. And what that means is that, we're not required to provide the sales price of a property to any government agency. And that includes municipalities, that includes the state, that includes any kind of borough or any other governing agency. With Alaska, it's not the same as Texas. Texas, for instance, one of the other non-disclosure states, has it codified into their constitution. So specifically there, they are a non-disclosure state by statute and by constitutional law. In Alaska, it has traditionally fallen under our right to privacy in our constitution. And the disclosure of financial details of a transaction have traditionally fallen under the protection that we experience of our privacy rights here in Alaska. So when the city and borough of Juneau actually passed an ordinance to require the disclosure of property prices, it wasn't necessarily in violation of any state requirement or any state law that says that those can't be disclosed, if that makes sense. That's the best I can explain it.
So I'm sorry.
Oh,
One thing I just want to distinguish real quick too. So
Mhm.
what you're talking about is disclosure of the sales price, not necessarily disclosure for material facts about the property, like there's a leak in the roof, there's something with the foundation, stuff like that. So that's not what we're talking about. It's really involving the sales price. Because if you disclose the full price of the sales price is disclosed, and then at that point, your property taxes are going to shoot through the roof.
Yes and no. So yes to your question. The disclosure issues that are required by the state, are basically between the seller and the buyer. So, but what we're talking about here is the actual disclosure of the price. As you probably know, all of our deeds are recorded in the state of Alaska with just a $10 charge on there. It just says in consideration of $10, Nani transfers this property to Mark.
Yeah. So why do you think, maybe explain to people why we felt it was important to keep these privacy rights for the consumer out there, and why we would want to not disclose sales prices?
It's the disclosure of sales prices has always been the door that that opens to allow transfer taxes on the sale of property. If they don't know how much you're selling it for, it's difficult for them to tax it, if that makes sense. And so there are 12 states right now that don't have a transfer tax on the sale of real property. And coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally enough, 11 of those are non-disclosure states. And so when we see the rumblings begin of people talking about disclosing real estate prices, naturally our minds go to transfer tax, and we are constantly looking for ways to develop better workforce housing, develop more affordable housing. And so anything that unnaturally increases the cost of selling a property that is not market driven is something that we really want to take a hard look at and try to eliminate if we can.
So what I'm hearing is that basically it's not something that's out there yet, but potentially it could open the door for a transfer tax, which would then be passed on to the consumer and really make the cost of buying and selling real estate a lot more.
Yeah.
Is that kind of in summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, on a state level, we've been keeping our eye on this for years, and I think the circumstances in Juneau back in 2020 are kind of what precipitated our whole involvement in this part of the process.
So where are we in this process?
We submitted we supported a bill that was introduced back in March in the first session this year. And that was a HB 134, and that was submitted in order to protect property owners from a transfer tax that would be implemented, and it basically prohibited transfer taxes on a state and municipal level. That bill has been in committee throughout the first session. We're hopeful that it will come out of session in the second, or hope it will come out of committee in the second session, and that we can begin to address that and make efforts further on that.
Mark, I just have a quick question. When we're talking about transfer tax, how much are we talking here? Because I think some people hear that, they hear tax this, tax that. They might not fully appreciate how much a transfer tax can be. So what's kind of the price tag for that?
So across the country, it ranges anywhere from 0.5% to 3%.
Oof. Brutal.
That's huge.
Right. Yeah.
So all that's still pending the final results on that, trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, is kind of what I'm hearing. And primarily the role that realtors played in it is the fact that we've been advocating behind the scenes with the legislative committees to make sure that we help protect the rights of homeownership to avoid these mishaps or these things in the future. Is that correct?
Correct. We're trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit. It all started when the city and borough of Juneau implemented a regulation that required the disclosure of the property sale price and certain other aspects of the transaction, including the names of the sellers and the buyers. And they also wanted to know the value of any personal property that was conveyed with the real property. And so when we saw that come through, we decided that that was the straw that we needed to jump in and start the process on this. And we started out with some of our Southeast Border Realtor members mobilizing and getting things in place. They went through, they spoke with attorneys, they spoke with everything else. They went through and got a Proposition 4 on the ballot for 2022, and proceeded to get signatures, proceeded to get advertising out there, tried to get groundswell support for that, and ended up being successful in repealing the ordinance that the city and borough of Juneau had put into place. And as part of that process, they brought in not only the state, but also NAR in those efforts. I know that NAR was very supportive in terms of advice and people, and also money. I think NAR ended up contributing about $92,000 to that campaign. The state contributed as well. But the real work was done on the local level out there. We had, people like Tanya Mosier, Annie Sparks, Tracy Heaton, Errol Champion, all those people were boots on the ground out there and really worked hard to get that repealed. And as part of that process, so that we didn't slide back down into that, we started looking at legislation on a state level and what we could support there. And we found somebody to actually submit a bill on our behalf, and that was when HB 134 came into being.
Outstanding. Awesome. So we do have a question from the comments section. You ready?
Ready.
All right. So coming in from Mr. A Link, and setting a realistic asking price for a property, doesn't it help to know what other comparable properties sold for? How do you get around that?
So that's a double-edged question. I think that when you take a look at the disclosure of property sales prices and who's on what side of that, the answer varies. And when the municipalities or the city and borough of Juneau came out and said that they want prices disclosed, it was for the purposes of being able to assess closer to the market value. And municipalities and boroughs are required to assess properties at market value, but it's also incumbent on them to do the appraisals to determine what that market value is. And so they're kind of looking for an easy way out by just saying, well, that's what you paid for it, that must be what the market value is. And in true form, I can't speak for CBJ, but in Anchorage, in the municipality, the assessor's office is actually quite good at determining what market value is. I think for, if you look at the homes that sold in 2022, and then you look at what they're assessed for in 2023, we see it's about 92 to 94% of the sale prices that they're assessed for, and that's pretty darn close. And last year was also kind of a weird market where we had some inflated prices just because of the incredibly low interest rates that we were experiencing. But to answer Mr. Link's question here, in setting a realistic asking price for a property, you're basically talking about the relationship between the seller and the realtor, and what the realtor uses to produce comparable sales and to give the seller expert advice is our multiple listing service. And our multiple listing service is exclusively available to real estate professionals and appraisers and a few others. It's not available to government agencies as a whole. So we are actually able to take the reported sales prices out of the MLS and share those with a seller that we have a relationship with.
Outstanding. Well, great question, A. Yeah. Feel free to. I'm sorry, Nani. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I just said, well put. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So, Thank you, A-Link. If anyone else has any other questions, I mean, you got the subject matter expert right here, so feel free to throw it into the comments section and be more than happy to answer that for you. I know I'm trying to make sure we don't accidentally start throwing around a lot of lingo that we're familiar with, and you folks aren't. So feel free to tell us to slow down and like ask us to clarify if you need us to.
Yeah, I'll try to avoid that too. So.
Outstanding. All right. So we had that over in Juneau. Do we know who was really pushing for trying to remove the disclosure then in Juneau? Like, is there a group? Is it the city itself? Like, what was the motivation of the people? Who was it, and what was the motivation?
It was actually the city and borough of Juneau that enacted the original ordinance. And it was the rumor is that it was tied to the sale of a piece of commercial property that the borough actually bid on, and the rumor that I heard was that the borough bid at the assessed value, and then the property actually sold for 2 or 3 times what it was assessed for. So it got them to looking at their assessments on property and how they were going about those assessments. And I guess they just decided that the shortest route to getting more accurate assessments is just to have a disclosure of the sales price.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, that does theoretically make sense, but I mean, where it might end up, that's a little more troubling than
right.
And a little more troubling, harder at the time doing their job.
Yeah. and as you and Nani both know, I mean, typically we see about we see sales prices that are anywhere from 98% to 102% of the listed price. So if they were really curious what a property is going to sell for, I mean, they could just look it up on Zillow and find out what it's listed for.
Yeah, well, to me, I think kind of the outlaying factor here is that not all legislation at property rights through the lens of what like the National Association of Realtor does. And so I think it's really cool that we have that group and a legislative committee with NAR, who kind of their purpose, or a big part of their purpose, is to look at how legislation may affect property owners throughout the nation, and specifically, like you said, in Alaska, when it gets to the local level, and how that may cost the consumer thousands of dollars more. Like you said, if a 3% transfer tax was put on top of all properties, that could really stifle the ability of property owners to potentially make a sale happen when they need it to.
Yep. And it's also an artificial increase to the price. The sellers are going to want to recoup that. And when you look at, market-driven forces that are increasing the price of a property, we can appraise to that, and we can determine, whether or not the value is there. When we look at artificial increases to the prices of property, which would include taxes and other fees, then we're going to have some difficulties with appraisals. We're going to have some difficulties with other market forces that are independent of that.
Right. We already have an affordable housing issue, so that wouldn't help that either.
Yeah. But, well, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say, like, my main concern with a transfer tax, especially if we're talking 0.5% to 3%. I mean, that we have a lot of military folks that come through here, and if they're suddenly having to pay an additional 3% on top of that, like, that's the difference between being able to sell and being stuck. Really, is what it comes down to. There's such a short amount of time, so.
And it's on both sides. They're having to. They're probably having to pay a little bit extra for the property so the seller can recoup part of that fee. And then when they go to sell it, they've got to pay that fee as well.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Absolutely. So, but I mean, it sounds like the transfer tax, at least for the moment, got some, already kind of stopped the non-disclosure, which, makes it, with that stopped, it makes anyone wanting to create a transfer tax more challenging for them at that point. But are there any other things that the NAR, ABR, everyone else is doing to try to prevent any development of a future transfer tax in the state?
Other than the bill that we currently have submitted, no, we're working hard to get that bill out of committee and onto the floor for a vote, but we won't see any movement on that until the second session starts.
Gotcha. No, that makes total sense. All right. If anyone else has any questions about the taxes and all that, I mean, feel free to throw it into the comment section. I think this is something for a lot of people where it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You're probably just not even thinking about it most of the time until you're suddenly slapped with like a $10,000, $20,000 like bill right at the end you weren't expecting. So yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to drop it in there. But I think we're about ready to switch gears and start talking Airbnbs and short-term rentals, which that is usually something everyone has an opinion about. So, Nani, I'll let you go and take that one.
Yeah, it's a fun topic. I mean, it's just I know Airbnbs have kind of popped up all over, especially during COVID. I think we saw a lot of those, and so I just wanted to ask Mark, is there any specific regulations that you're aware of out there that maybe the consumer needs to be thinking about at this particular time around the short-term rentals, Airbnbs, also known as mother-in-law apartments, ADUs, all of those type of things?
Yeah. So currently, we don't have a whole lot of regulations when it comes to short-term rentals here in Alaska. We do have taxes that owners pay on those for their stays and the revenue that they bring in. They pay a percentage of those in taxes to the local boroughs. But in terms of actual regulations of short-term rentals, what we're seeing across the country in a lot of major metropolitan areas is that they're putting more and more restrictions on short-term rentals, and it varies. The reason for that varies. A lot of the thrust is to try to curtail some of the activities that might occur in a short-term rental, for instance, parties or whatever else is occurring that might disrupt the peaceful enjoyment of nearby property owners. So that's one thing that a lot of metropolitan areas are looking at. Another thing that a lot of metropolitan areas are looking at is is the current trend of revenue from short-term rentals actually removing too many long-term rentals from the marketplace? And is it affecting workforce housing? Is it affecting the affordability of housing? And so those are all things that the municipality here in Anchorage is looking at as well. They have made a proposal. It's Anchorage Ordinance 2023-110, which is to help regulate the short-term rentals here in Alaska. And mostly the regulation that they're proposing has to do with establishing a registration or a license for the short-term rental. There'll be fees involved in that. They haven't set the amount of those fees yet. They're also, doing a few more things to try to protect the people that are actually staying at those short-term rentals. One of the things that has been a little bit of a challenge for short-term rental owners to accept is that they're looking for an operator who can respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, within 1 hour if there's some problem occurring with the short-term rental. It's not specific as to what that problem might be. It could be that somebody found a smudge on the refrigerator front or something like that. So some of the regulations that are proposed will probably have to be talked through a little bit just to see what the feasibility is of that, and frankly, what the enforcement of that would be. But we do see it happening across the country fairly frequently. It is coming to Alaska in one form or another, and I think Anchorage will probably be the first municipality in Anchorage that I know of to implement some sort of regulations.
Yeah, I think in my research, I was looking, and it looks like maybe as soon as May 1st of 2024, they might be implementing a $400 fee, and that you might have to register under that. I think that's still out there for debate, but that's kind of what I'm hearing. And also that some of that might be waived if you actually live in the property and you are renting part of that, like a room out, or your mother-in-law as well. So it's interesting. Is there anything that, any discussion as to what can be done out there on that, or how, that we could work with the consumers on that end that you're aware of, Mark?
Oh, I don't know how many of your listeners are in Anchorage, Jamin, but with that, with AO 2023-110, the public hearing for that is going to be on December 5th. And so that would be the forum to attend if you're in Anchorage, and if you are an owner of STRs and you have some objections or some clarification that you'd like on the proposed ordinance, that would be the time to do it. I know that there have been several letters sent in to the Assembly as well to kind of clarify some of the things that are proposed in that ordinance, and to find out a little bit more about, what the chances of getting some of those regulations a little bit more relaxed are. There's also been a bill that was submitted on the state level, House Bill 184, which was submitted by Representative Gray toward the end of the first session here this year, and really hasn't had much more than a reading at this point. So, that'll probably be discussed in detail in the next session. Probably the biggest point of contention I saw in that bill will be that the current version of the bill proposes limiting the number of STRs to any particular operator to one, and which feels a little restrictive to me. But we'll see how that plays out in the final bill.
Yeah, and I know a lot of, I know some investors where they have like a lot of Airbnb short-term rentals, and I know something like that would essentially be a death knell for them, and they'd have to pull their investments out of the Anchorage area and go elsewhere. But I do know that's something that's kind of near and dear to some people's hearts. So I'd be interested to see if the limit to like one short STR per person would be the way that they want to go. And I guess it really kind of depends on what the goals of the Assembly is, if they're trying to encourage it, if they're trying to discourage it, if they're trying to just keep it but have more regulation around it. Like it's one of those things where it's hard to like actually tell how it's going to go to actually like get in the room and hear from people how they're actually going to be dissecting this thing.
Yeah. And the proposed ordinance in Anchorage doesn't really address a limitation on the number of STRs you can have. It merely addresses the operation of those and the availability of the operator to be on site.
Got it. Well, that definitely does make sense.
So ADUs, there's been some changes with those as of late, or there's some proposals. I don't know if they've completely gone all the way through the, accessory dwelling units and some of the code changes in the municipality.
So yeah, you're kind of cutting out a little bit, Nani. So
Oh, sorry.
I think you were asking about the new regulations or the relaxing of the regulations around ADUs in Anchorage. And ADU is accessory dwelling unit, or it's commonly referred to as a mother-in-law, but it's either an attached or a detached additional dwelling that is part of a current dwelling. And they've eased some of the restrictions. They've eased some of the requirements for that. They've made it so that the owner doesn't necessarily have to be on site occupying the property as it was in the past. They've also eased some of the restrictions for the size of the ADUs. They've also opened it up to more types of real estate. So in other words, if you have anywhere from a single family to a fourplex, now you can have an ADU in addition to the units that are already there. ADUs and STRs are two different things. While you could certainly use an ADU as an STR and do short-term rentals out of it, I think the norm, at least what I've seen in Anchorage, is to have more of long-term tenants in those ADUs. And I think the purpose of loosening some of those regulations in the ADUs is the same thing that everybody's looking at, and that's to, make workforce housing more available, and also to try to, improve the affordability of some of that housing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one thought I've had looking at this is just how, like, your approach on Airbnbs, the short-term rentals, it really comes down to like what community it is that you're in. Like, I know that, Anchorage as a whole, it's the biggest market in all of Alaska, and so it does have the ability to absorb more of these short-term Airbnbs. And I haven't seen it really having a huge impact on the housing and the affordability of housing in the area. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't really seen it. But once you start going to, other communities like the Sewards, the Girdwoods, kind of these smaller communities where they're just limited on how much they can do, or they've decided decades ago they weren't going to develop, and now they just have less housing, and now like half of them are Airbnbs. I bet it's just going to be a completely different approach, just depending on where you're from.
I would probably agree with you. I think that, in those smaller resort communities that we have in Alaska, it's really a problem. If you take Girdwood, for instance, you've got several hundred people that are involved in the operation of the Alaska Resort down there, for instance, that are, what we call workforce. So, they're down there, helping clean the rooms, they're tending bar, they're, managing the hotel, whatever it is they do. And, where are you going to live or purchase in Girdwood that is affordable for someone who's doing that kind of work? And, I know that they've proposed several things down there, and they've tried to improve that. But the nature of Girdwood is that it's a highly desired area for people to own real estate, and the prices just keep increasing, and the availability of homes down there is very limited.
Kind of the recreational town problems for sure in that area. Yeah. I know they've built a lot of auxiliary apartments for some of the workers at like the hotel and such, but yeah, just for people who want to just live there, it's very limited for sure.
Yeah, and I hear they proposed more of those, so we'll see. We'll see what develops out of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I can kind of see it from both sides, just depending on where you're from, because I mean, especially those areas where there's hardly any any options or any housing there.
Mhm.
That's also where you can go in and make like, you know, $5,000-$10,000 a month sometimes off of Airbnb if you put your house on there. So I can kind of see it from both directions. There definitely needs to be some kind of a balancing of that, but yeah, it's interesting to kind of see how the different communities are handling this.
Right.
I know one thing that I found interesting as we were preparing for this, I've worked obviously with several investors over the years, and this is just a side note for any of your listeners that are investors or that have, rental properties or those types of things. That I was noticing that it doesn't matter whether it's an ADU or whether it's a mother-in-law apartment or whether it's a single family dwelling that you're renting out, all of those require a business license. So I think that's something else that doesn't necessarily get recognized in the community a whole bunch, especially in the municipality. So just kind of a disclosure there that I thought, wow, I think this is something that not everybody recognizes, because I know a lot of people out there that, are landlords, accidental landlords sometimes because they're military, but business license aren't always taken out as landlords. So something to think about.
Yeah.
It's like it's one of those things where it doesn't matter until it matters a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, do we I guess from the comment section, do we have any thoughts, questions, anything like that about Airbnbs? I'd say we probably got about another 5 to 10 minutes left here. So this is kind of your final call. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, objections, feel free to go ahead and drop them down below, and we'll go ahead and talk through those real quick.
And I would encourage people that are interested in this sort of thing to also, visit the municipal website for the assembly. I know that for Anchorage, for instance, they have, pretty extensive strategic plan that they're doing for housing here in Anchorage. It's available on the website, and I think actually public comment closes for that in early December. So if you are interested, just go to muni.org and click on the assembly section, and you can check out a lot of what the municipality is doing to try to provide more workforce housing and more affordable housing here in Anchorage.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know what? Here's a question just for both of you real quick. What is the benefit of going short term, or the benefit, and where there's the pros and the cons of doing a short term rental versus a long term lease? Like, what are the pros and cons there?
I'll let Nani take that one.
Mark, you want to take it away?
Take it away. Take it away.
I think part of it just depends on, who you are. I mean, I think if you want to have a little bit more of a hands-off business, long-term is probably the way to go. Ideally, you get a renter in there and you have steady income and coverage of your mortgage. If you have a mortgage over, at least a year or however long the lease is, preferably, even longer if you can get a good tenant over time. With the short term, you have the high turnover. So you're essentially operating a, one bedroom hotel where you have cleanings and a lot more turnover from day to day, week to week. And so there's a lot of things to consider, not just your cleaning costs and the potential damage to your property with the high turnover, but the, bookings and all that other stuff. So I think if you want to be super engaged and hands-on, I know there's companies out there that do take care of the Airbnb management per se for people who want to be more hands-off. You certainly can make a lot of money, which is, why people are doing it and why it's so popular these days. But Alaska is a very, transient population as far as that goes too. So just making sure that you buy something that's in a good booking place if that's your primary goal, to do that. I know with condos, you can't always do them. And in certain condos, there's restrictions against short-term rentals. They require at least a 1-year lease. So some considerations on that part as well. So those are my primary thoughts. If you have anything else, Mark?
Short-term rentals aren't all the glamour that they're cracked up to be. You hear a lot of people saying, "Oh yeah, we've got a place, we Airbnb it," and it sounds like they're making, thousands and thousands of dollars. But I think what a lot of people don't recognize is precisely what Nani just said, that, with the long-term tenant, you have not only the added security there and pretty much a guarantee of rent over the next 12 months or for however long you've got them in there. But you also have a lot less maintenance and hands-on things that you have to do with the property. When you have a short-term rental, and, one person moves out, the next person is moving in, you can't get your cleaners over there to get the unit cleaned before the next one moves in. So it's you're the one going over there cleaning that up. If somebody damages the unit, it's you're the one going over there, trying to get it in shape for the next guest. There's a lot of intensive things that go along with maintaining a property like that. And the trade-off, as Nani mentioned, there are some companies out there that will do Airbnb management or short-term rental management, as it's generically called, but they're expensive, and it doesn't completely mitigate the increase in revenue that you're getting from the property, but it certainly affects it, and it certainly curtails it a little bit. I've
seen like some companies where it's like 30 to like 40% of your gross, like you pay for that service. So it's spendy.
Yeah, it gets up there. And, in Alaska, obviously, our seasons are pretty, conditional. So we see a lot of seasonality going with short-term rentals up here. And I think as more people are getting into that business, so to speak, and the availability of short-term rentals goes up, that also affects the revenue and puts downward pressure on what you can ask for a STR. So those are my thoughts surrounding it. I think for the most part, I fall on the side of long-term tenants. I think a good long-term tenant that is taking care of your place and respecting it is worth their weight in gold. So
100%. Yeah. I think just to kind of add on to that, a lot of people, like Mark was saying, they get into this and they think, oh, look at the dollar signs, I'm going to make lots of money, I'm going to rent this out for $200 a night, or depending on the size of your property, where that goes. And then you start adding up the monthly and you're like, wow, this is a lot of money, I'm going to really do well. But you have to realize that it's a job. I mean, you don't get to just walk away from it. Like Mark said, if there's a problem, if the cleaners don't show up and you have a booking for a day or two away, you are your cleaner. And I think that is the disgruntled part that I hear from consumers and sellers or people who went into it, is I don't think they had a clear vision of, this is my job, I really have to work at this. And those tend to fail quicker. But the people who really make it their business, whether it's a long-term or a short-term, tend to have higher success. Nobody's going to watch your assets more than you. 100%.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Mark and Nani did great on kind of giving you the pros and cons there. I'll throw a couple of small things in there, geared more directly to just straight investors, because I know, like, you just see like the dollars and cents and it looks awesome and all that, and why would you do long-term renting? Well, a big reason for that is kind of all the legislation that's coming out that we're talking about here. And if your entire investment hinges upon an environment that's friendly towards STRs and Airbnbs, and suddenly that gets taken away, like you're just upside down, and that's kind of takes it out from under you. And also, there's really a spectrum that they talked about where it goes from like most needy to, I'm not going to say mailbox money because that doesn't exist, but we'll say less work that goes into it. Long-term renters, those by far are going to be the least amount of work that you're going to put into it, the least mind share you're going to have to put into it. And at the very extreme end of the spectrum is going to be those Airbnbs, those STRs, where every night you're explaining to a new person where the remote is, how to unlock the door, please do this, please do that, and all the other issues that go into it. So, I mean, it's much easier also with most people if they're just trying to work a 9 to 5 and do this on the side. If it's a long-term in it, because it's just so much less brain power is going to go into taking care of it. If you're looking for a happy medium between the two, you might consider as an investor looking at what's called like an intermediate term rental, where it's like 30 days or more. Because technically all the stuff that we're talking about, like the restrictions, it's anything for 30 days or less.
Correct.
Which means that if you're renting month to month to like traveling nurses and people who are just traveling professionals and they need something, all those new rules, regulations, like they're not talking about you because you technically have tenants at that point. You don't have guests.
Yeah. Furnished corporate rentals, things like that. And I would also piggyback on what you're saying, Jamin. If you're an investor that's going out and looking at properties like this and thinking about purchasing something, be aware also of what kind of numbers you're seeing. When you look at what kind of revenue a property is generating on a short-term rental basis, try to weigh that against, what you could potentially get from that property if you decided to convert to long-term leases, because I personally don't see the fad. I call it a fad because everything fades. But when you look at the money that's coming in for short-term rentals right now, I don't feel like that's sustainable as more and more properties are used as short-term rentals. And as Jamin said, as they get the regulation put on them, it'll make them less attractive and less profitable. And so as an investor, when you're looking to buy something like that, just be cognizant of what a true stabilized income stream would be for that property and base your decisions on that rather than, what kind of blue sky numbers you're seeing.
No, I mean, 1,000%. I'm glad you said that because, I mean, that's actually how I ended up living out in Wasilla for a while. I originally was purchasing the property out here to use it as some kind of a short term, but then I was like, just with the interest rate I have on this, without it being my primary residence, like it's either Airbnb or like you're done. You can't get enough on this thing to be able to rent it out long term. So just as an investor, I mean, you're kind of talking to a number of agents here who've invested over the years, and it's not pretty when you box yourself into a corner and like plan A works or nothing works and there's no plan B. So give yourself those options of not having like a do or die scenario with the numbers. So where it's like either Airbnb or the whole thing doesn't work.
I think to your point, like an ABC plan is, something that's always critical to have. I mean, is the long-term rental going to support the price that you have on the place? Is the short-term rental an option? Do you have the extra furniture and all the other stuff? I even have had clients who have done room rentals, and that's been really, like college dorm style type deals. And that's been really lucrative for them, depending on, again, where they buy, but, or occupy, like you said. But having an ABC game plan is always important when you go into any type of investment, whether it's your primary residence or not.
Good point.
Yeah, that's really good. So we've got a question here from Mr. A. Link. So do any local
Back.
governments give incentives to employees to develop housing for employees or buy up multi-unit buildings? Is this even a good idea? Let's see, Mark, you might have more insights on that than me.
So I can point out a couple of things. There's actually some proposals that are being made in the assembly, the Anchorage Assembly, to be able to convert some of the older hotels or things like that we have over here to condominiums, or to we used to call it white slip them, but to convert those properties to more affordable workforce housing. So there are some incentives that could be applied to that, just in terms of the streamlining of the process and the relaxing of some of the regulations. I don't know the details for the Alyeska resort that Nani and I were talking about earlier, but I'm sure that they're getting some incentives or some sort of assistance for developing workforce housing for their employees. Other than that, I haven't really seen anything come through. Have you, Nani?
So, I think to Mr. or Mrs. Link's question there, I guess, there's different programs that always come in and out of vogue. I know Alaska Housing has different programs when it comes to financing for government employees, teachers, first responders, and all those other things. So those do come and go. You just kind of have to watch. And that's based upon like what kinds of funds are available or grants that are available. Sometimes they go quickly, sometimes they last for years. As far as that goes, I was going over and listening to, again, Mark had mentioned there's some really great resources, but Alaska Housing Committee Summit just recently happened. The whole thing is on YouTube. Again, you can go to the state website and find that. But there's some push for what's called a Helper Act, which is a federal bill that will give state employees and or other government employees maybe some incentives for buying, along with first responders, teachers, and those types of things. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for. There's a lot of chatter, but I don't think there's anything in play right at this moment, but definitely some things that are out there that might be coming down the road later that I'm hearing.
No, that's absolutely. I mean, I personally don't have any more insights than that. So yeah, I'm gonna defer to Mark and Nani. All right. Well, guys, I think that's it. So, again, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Nani, for co-hosting. Mark, thank you very much for jumping on here and kind of giving your insights as to how exactly realtors are really helping improving the communities that they live in and continuing their responsibilities to work as fiduciaries for their clients. And it's it's great when you can see that effort coming to fruition and doing some really big things to really protect the consumers. And thank you very much for everything that you do.
Good. Thank you for having me on. This is my first one.
For having us.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
Hey, well,
Appreciate it. Hope your consumers got something out of it today.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll have to do this again soon, but everyone else, thank you very much for watching. And we will see you guys next time.